newly declassified documents would prove that Hitler ended his life in Argentina.
The year is 1945. The world celebrates the fall of the Third Reich. But from the ashes of Berlin, a whisper begins to circulate, a question that will haunt historians for decades. Did Adolf Hitler truly die in his bunker? For over half a century, rumors have persisted of a daring escape.
That Hitler died in April 30th, cyanide pill in his underground bunker.
A secret flight to the remote plains of Argentina. Now, for the first time, the Argentine government has opened its vaults.
Argentine President Javier Milei last month financial documents relating to Nazi fugitives who settled in Argentina at the request of the United States,
releasing long classified files that finally answer one of history's greatest mysteries. Join us as we divulge the secret Nazi files Argentina just released. April 1945. The air in the Führer bunker smelled like a stale mix of damp concrete, diesel fuel, and cold sweat. And just above, the world was ending. The constant, earth-shaking thunder of Soviet artillery was a grim drumbeat to the final days of the Third Reich. Berlin was being crushed, and below its streets, in his cramped underground concrete prison, so was Adolf Hitler. This was not the powerful leader whose name sent shivers down the spine of anyone who heard it. The man who shuffled through the bunker's narrow corridors was a ghost. His once commanding posture was gone, replaced by a stooped, painful shuffle. His left arm shook uncontrollably. His skin had a sickly, greasy look, and his eyes, which followers had once called piercing, were now glassy and distant. The voice that had screamed speeches to millions was often reduced to a tired, barely audible mumble. This change wasn't just the result of stress. For years, his personal doctor, Theodore Morell, had been feeding him a dangerous cocktail of drugs. Uppers, downers, and even pills containing a dangerous pesticide called strychnine. These medications, meant to keep him going, were slowly eating him from the inside out. A failed bomb plot the previous summer had left him with busted eardrums and shattered nerves, making him jump at every sound, trusting almost no one. As the military maps showed the enemy closing in, Hitler's mind seemed to drift further from reality. He issued frantic orders to armies that no longer existed, dreaming up miracle weapons that would never come. And then, in a final desperate act of spite, he issued the Nero Decree. He commanded his own people to destroy Germany itself, to blow up bridges, factories, and power plants. If he couldn't have his empire, no one could. When his minister, Albert Speer, begged him to think of the German people struggling to survive after the war, Hitler was irked. To him, their survival didn't matter anymore. He would rather see the entire nation burn than admit his defeat. The final week in the bunker was a special kind of hell. The air grew heavier, and the walls seemed to close in. On April 22nd, during a military meeting, his people's last hope was finally broken. He was told again that his orders were impossible. His defenses had collapsed. The man who had always promised victory finally cracked. He screamed, his face purpling with rage, crying betrayal, and for the first time shrieking the truth they all knew. The war was lost. The betrayals kept coming. He learned that Hermann Göring, his second in command, was trying to seize power from him. Then came the deepest cut. Heinrich Himmler, the head of his dreaded SS, was secretly trying to surrender to the Americans. The world he had built wasn't just falling apart, it was turning against him. The final straw was the news about his fellow dictator, Benito Mussolini. Italian partisans had captured and executed him, hanging his body for an angry mob to spit on. Hitler knew then, with cold certainty, he would never let that happen to him. In the early hours of April 29th, with the roar of battle growing ever closer, he did something strangely ordinary. He married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a small, sad ceremony. There was no joy, only grim necessity. He then dictated his final political testament, a document blaming everyone but himself for the catastrophe. He had made his choice. There would be a grand escape, no last stand. The thunder of Soviet artillery was now just streets away. Inside the bunker, a strange, heavy silence fell after the single gunshot. The door to Hitler's study opened. Inside, the scene was grim. According to official Nazi reports, Adolf Hitler sat slumped on a sofa, a small hole in his right temple. A pistol lay at his feet. Next to him, Eva Braun, his wife of less than 40 hours, was curled up. Her body was still. The sharp, bitter smell of almonds hung in the air. It was April 30th, 1945, around 3:30 in the afternoon. The war was over for them. According to the stories, what followed was disturbing and chaotic. Following Hitler's own strict orders, his most loyal aides wrapped the bodies in gray blankets. They carried them up the 4 flights of stairs, out of the dark bunker, and into the shattered garden of the Reich Chancellery. The air outside was thick with smoke and the deafening sound of battle. Soviet shells screamed overhead. There, in a shallow crater, they poured petrol over the corpses and set them on fire. The stories go that the flames struggled to catch initially, but soon they roared, consuming the physical remains of the Nazi dictator and his wife. The aides made a hurried Nazi salute and returned to the bunker, leaving the fire to finish its work. It was a rushed, messy end. Days later, on May 5th, Soviet soldiers searching the area found the gruesome sight. The bodies were badly burned, almost impossible to recognize. But they knew this was significant. The remains were carefully gathered and taken away for examination. The Soviets were determined to find the truth. Had Hitler really died, or had he escaped at the last second? The answer lay not in the burned flesh, but in the mouth. Despite the fire, parts of the jaws and teeth had survived. The Soviets tracked down 2 key witnesses, Käthe Häusermann, the assistant to Hitler's personal dentist, and Fritz Echtmann, the dental technician who had made Hitler's bridges. They showed the witnesses the dental remains without telling them who they belonged to. The identification was immediate and certain. Häusermann recognized her own work instantly: the specific bridge work, the porcelain crowns, the unusual dental structure. It was a perfect match to Hitler's dental charts and X-rays. The same was confirmed for Eva Braun. There was no doubt. The teeth told the story the flames could not hide. This remains the single most important piece of forensic evidence proving Hitler's death. Yet, almost immediately, a cloud of confusion was thrown over the supposed clear truth. The Soviet leadership, under Joseph Stalin, began to play a strange game. That summer, at a meeting with Allied leaders, Stalin calmly suggested that Hitler might have escaped. He could be in Spain, he mused, or perhaps Argentina. For months, Soviet officials gave conflicting stories. One day, they'd say he died by cyanide. Next, they'd suggest he was still alive and on the run. They refused to show the dental evidence to the West. Why would they do this? According to experts, it was a classic tactic. By keeping the story murky, Stalin gained power. He could keep the world guessing and control the narrative. The mystery allowed the Soviets to suggest they were still hunting, giving them an excuse to extend their influence. It also covered for their initial delay in confirming the find. This deliberate disinformation has continued for decades. The truth was supposed to be simple. Adolf Hitler died by his own hand in a Berlin bunker. But simple truths are often no match for a good story. Almost before the ashes in the Chancellery garden had cooled, a powerful and enduring myth was born, the legend that the Führer had somehow escaped. The first and most powerful breath of life for this myth came from an unlikely source: the Soviets, who had actually found his body. Joseph Stalin, a master of political games, saw more value in mystery than in truth. At the Potsdam Conference in the summer of 1945, he casually told Allied leaders that Hitler had probably escaped. He might be in Spain, Stalin suggested, or perhaps he had fled to Argentina. This wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy. For months, Soviet officials gave wildly conflicting reports. One day, they would say he died by cyanide. Next, they would claim he was shot. Then, they would float the idea that he was still alive. This deliberate confusion was a classic disinformation campaign. By keeping the world guessing, Stalin kept everyone off balance. He made the Soviet Union feel like the only power still diligently hunting for the truth, which gave him more influence in post-war negotiations. The very people who had the proof were the ones who started the lie. This Soviet-made cloud of doubt found fertile ground in the West. In the chaotic years after the war, stories began to trickle in. A fisherman in the Baltic Sea swore he saw a submarine heading north. A shopkeeper in Argentina claimed a European man with a familiar toothbrush mustache bought supplies. These whispers were enough to trigger official investigations. Both the FBI and the CIA, aware that many high-ranking Nazis had genuinely escaped to South America, felt they had to check out every lead. Files were opened, agents were assigned. A 1955 CIA report from a source codenamed CIMELODY3 even included a photograph of a man who looked like an aged Hitler, allegedly living in Colombia under the name Adolf Hitler. The report was investigated and deemed unreliable, but decades later, when these old files were declassified, the public saw only the sensational claim, the photograph and the speculation, not the boring conclusion that it was a dead end. The very existence of these investigations made the myth feel more credible. But the major reason the myth persists is not even about documents or spies. It lives on because of how our minds work. For some, that a villain so great could have such a small, pathetic end is unthinkable. We expect a dramatic showdown, a final justice. The idea that he simply gave up and died felt almost unsatisfying. It robbed the world of the courtroom trial he deserved. As historian Richard J. Evans explained, some people almost admired Hitler too much to believe he was gone. They thought, he'd fooled the Allies so many times previously, he must have fooled them again. For others, believing he was still alive was a form of wish fulfillment, a hope that he could still be found and brought to justice. After World War II, while tribunals sought justice, a secret network emerged. Its purpose? To spirit away the very men the world was hunting. This wasn't a makeshift operation, but a sophisticated, well-oiled machine known as the Rat Lines, a secret railroad that carried Nazi war criminals from the ashes of Europe to new lives in Argentina. While Adolf Hitler was not seen among its passengers, the sheer scale and brazenness of this operation is what made the thought of his escape seem more possible. The journey began with a welcome sign held by the highest levels of the Argentine government. President Juan Perón, leading a nation with deep-rooted fascist sympathies within its military and large German communities, saw opportunity in the Allies' enemies. To Perón, these fleeing Nazis were valuable assets, not mass murderers. He believed their technical expertise, military experience, and fierce anti-communism would be crucial for Argentina's development and his own power in the budding Cold War. This wasn't just tolerance, it was active recruitment. Argentina became a promised land for those with the darkest pasts. The vehicle for this great escape was the Rat Line. It was like a well-organized travel agency for war criminals. Run by a mix of sympathetic Catholic clergy, former SS officers, and covert government operatives, these networks provided a full suite of services. They supplied flawless forged passports, often from the International Red Cross, brand new identities with backstories, and safe passage on commercial cargo ships. The most famous route, the monastery route, smuggled men through Italy and Spain with the help of sympathetic monasteries. It was surprisingly efficient. An estimated 10,000 Nazis and fascist collaborators found new homes in South America this way, with Argentina as the prime destination. The recently released Argentine files confirm this was no secret, revealing decades of confidential presidential decrees that offered these men official protection from prying foreign governments. The proof of this system's success walked the streets of Buenos Aires in plain sight. Consider Josef Mengele, the angel of death of Auschwitz. After arriving in 1949, he was so confident in his safety that he initially lived under his own name, even registering as a physician. It was only later, as the net tightened, that he took up a new name, Gregor Helmut. For years, the man who performed horrific experiments on children was just another face in the crowd. Then there was Adolf Eichmann, the chief logistician of the Holocaust. He lived a quiet, unremarkable life as Ricardo Clement in a small house in the Lanús suburb. He worked at a Mercedes-Benz factory, rode the bus, and raised his family. His ordinary existence was a perfect disguise, shattered only when Israeli Mossad agents staged a daring snatch in 1960. For decades, Erich Priebke, the SS captain who helped massacre 335 Italian civilians in the Ardeatine caves, enjoyed a peaceful life in the charming alpine town of Bariloche. He was a respected community member, even heading the local German-Argentine Cultural Association, until a television news crew finally exposed him in the 1990s. The presence of these men, these known monsters, living freely and comfortably, is the single most important reason the Hitler story found oxygen. If the angel of death could sip coffee in a Buenos Aires cafe, and the architect of the final solution could clock in at a factory job, then why not the Führer? Argentina's open door for Nazis didn't just rewrite the endings for thousands of war criminals. It helped write a puzzling ending for Hitler that the world is still trying to erase. For decades, the stories were told in faint whispers. Everyone knew that Nazi war criminals had found a safe haven in Argentina after World War II. But it's one thing to know something, and proving it is a different thing entirely. The ugly truth was locked away in government vaults. Argentina had kept this history hidden for long, but in 2025 it finally came to light. President Javier Milei gave the order for the release of 1,850 classified files. These weren't just a few old papers. It was a huge trove of intelligence reports, banking records, and, most stunningly, confidential presidential decrees stretching from 1957 to 2005. For the first time, the inner workings of Argentina's relationship with the Third Reich's most wanted were laid bare for anyone with an internet connection to see. It was an unprecedented act of transparency for a nation that had kept these secrets for generations. So, what's actually in these files? The documents confirm the almost unbelievable audacity of these men. They show that Joseph Mengele, the notorious angel of death from Auschwitz, didn't even bother to hide when he first arrived in 1949. The files list his addresses in the suburbs of Buenos Aires and detail his later shift to the alias Gregor Helmut. They trace the quiet, undisturbed life of Adolf Eichmann, the Holocaust's head engineer, who lived as Ricardo Clement until Israeli agents snatched him from a Buenos Aires street. But the most chilling revelations aren't about the Nazis themselves. They're about the government that sheltered them. The files include secret reports from Argentina's own intelligence services and federal police. These reports show that authorities knew exactly who these men were and where they were living. They weren't just turning a blind eye, they were actively looking the other way. The documents reveal how Germany would send formal requests to arrest and extradite a monster like Mengele, and how Argentine officials would coldly reject them, hiding behind flimsy technicalities and procedural issues. It was a bureaucratic game of keep away, using paperwork to protect mass murderers. Of all the secrets the newly opened Argentine files threatened to spill, one question loomed largest. Would they finally prove that Adolf Hitler had escaped to South America? The documents revealed a stunning web of Nazi activity, details on Mengele's addresses, Eichmann's quiet life, and official protection for history's worst war criminals. The stage seemed perfectly set for the ultimate revelation. But the files hold a final, definitive secret: absolutely no trace of Adolf Hitler. This absence speaks volumes. The records are so comprehensive. They detail the arrivals of low-level SS officers, the bank accounts of obscure officials, and the bureaucratic paperwork that protected them. If a minor functionary's visa application was logged, wouldn't the arrival of the Führer himself have left a single solitary paper trail? A landing record? A security memo? A record of a protected residence? Yet, across 1,850 files, there is nothing. Not a single report, not a whispered memo, not a hidden clue. The very thoroughness that exposes the lives of other Nazis ultimately clears the historical mystery of Hitler. The files prove that the system was designed to hide people, and it worked brilliantly for thousands. The fact that Hitler is entirely absent from this elaborate hiding machine is perhaps the strongest evidence that he was never there to be hidden. Adding a final ironic twist to the story, 2025 also saw an accidental discovery that highlighted this point. Construction workers cleaning the basement of Argentina's Supreme Court stumbled upon forgotten crates that had been shipped from the German embassy in Tokyo in 1941. Their contents? Not escape plans for Hitler, but something perhaps more revealing. Thousands of pamphlets, films, and books of Nazi propaganda, all intended to spread Hitler's ideology across Argentina. This forgotten cache shows just how deep and early Nazi roots went in the country. They were building a cultural foothold, not a personal bunker for their leader. The propaganda was meant to win hearts and minds, not to prepare for the arrival of a single man. Together, these two discoveries tell a complete story. They reveal a country that was deeply enmeshed with the Nazi regime, willing to shelter its followers and amplify its message. But they also draw a clear line. Argentina was a haven for those who followed Hitler's ideology, but it was never, according to its own long-hidden records, a refuge for the man himself. The files finally closed the door on the myth, using the state's own secrets to confirm that Hitler's story ended right where history said it did, in a bunker in Berlin. Even though the Argentine files describe a clear picture that doesn't include Hitler, the escape myth refuses to die. That persistence is the most interesting part of the story. It doesn't rest on evidence, but on a powerful mix of psychology, culture, and the lure of a secret history. The Soviets helped plant those seeds. As later searches show, Stalin deliberately spread doubt, telling Allied leaders at Potsdam that Hitler might have fled to Spain or Argentina. That wasn't an accident, but a deliberate disinformation tactic meant to unsettle the West and boost Soviet leverage in the early Cold War. By creating ambiguity, the Soviets left a gap that speculation quickly filled. Western agencies, even though they officially believed Hitler was dead, unintentionally kept the rumor alive. The FBI and CIA felt obliged to investigate every reported sighting, however outlandish. A declassified 1955 CIA report even included a photograph from Colombia of a man alleged to be Hitler using the name Adolf Hitler. Those inquiries always found nothing, but when the files were released decades later, the headline, not the dismissive conclusion, stuck in the public mind, making the theory seem more plausible than it actually was. The myth also taps into deep psychological needs. For some, it grew from a warped admiration. As historian Richard J. Evans notes, some people believe that because Hitler had deceived the Allies so often, he must have deceived them again. For others, it was wishful thinking, the idea that someone responsible for unparalleled evil should face a dramatic public reckoning, not die alone in a bunker. Popular culture keeps the story alive. Shows like Grey Wolf, Hitler's escape to Argentina treat the escape as fact, even though historians call it a hoax, and many books and specials prefer a thrilling tale to careful history. They point to real things, Nazi ratlines and figures like Mengele in South America, as supposed proof, while ignoring the definitive evidence that Hitler did not survive. Ultimately, the myth endures because it's more appealing than the truth. It promises secret tunnels, international intrigue, and a hidden final chapter. The Argentine files, which document other escape networks in exacting detail, have effectively closed the historical case for Hitler's survival. But they can't completely extinguish the very human desire to believe in a more mysterious world.